Welcome to Greg's Maker Corner. In this video, I'm going to talk about a lot of my favorite tools that I use on a day-to-day basis, and I'm going to break it down into a few different categories. Just general tools that I find useful, tools for electronics, adhesives, and then of course 3D printing accessories. So if you're looking for maybe some ideas to build your workshop up, or you're not sure where to get started with a workbench, this is probably a good video for you. And certainly if you've got somebody that's looking for ideas for you for gifts, feel free to send them this information. I do have all the links posted in the description to these tools, and where possible I've used my Amazon affiliate link, so it helps me and it costs you nothing if you use those links. I know not everyone is in the US that watches, so I've also included some AliExpress links where I can find them. The way this video is set up is that there are different sections, so if you want to just kind of cruise through the video, feel free to expand the description of the video and then click the link for a specific section. One of the most commonly used tools that I have here are the Bonhus metric drivers. These are very good metric drivers. I've actually had this set for around 6 years, and I use them a lot for any type of screw on a 3D printer. First started using these on my drones, which is kind of what got me into the 3D printing hobby. The thing about these drivers is that they have a ball end joint, which is useful for getting at screws at an angle. So a lot of times you might not have the vertical space, so this can be handy. The other thing that I really like about these over other drivers is that they have different handle sizes. So it's really easy. After a while of use, you're going to just remember that, oh yeah, I use this one on M3 screws and I use this one on M2 screws or whatever. So the size of the handle makes it really easy to find. By the way, if you like this case and want to use it, I put it on things and the link's in the description. Next up, I'm going to talk about the Wiha drivers. These are really nice metric drivers. These are straight, so they're not going to have any kind of ball end joint. The nice thing about this is that you're going to be able to get a really good connection. You're not going to have to worry about stripping the screw heads as much. They don't wear down quite as easily. One thing that I don't really like about them as much is that the handle sizes are all kind of about the same. They start to taper down, but it's not as easy as the Bonhus to just grab one. You have to look at it. And if you're like me and you get sweaty hands, then this print's eventually going to wear out. So, but other than that, these are fantastic and they're very high quality, so I would definitely recommend them. All right, next up, simply a pair of scissors, right? I mean, these are something that I use all the time. I might cut wire with them. I might cut filament with them. These are very heavy duty. Pretty much any pair will do, but I would caution against the really cheap budget kind like these. I think I picked these up for a few dollars. They just don't cut quite as well, but I do use them for like maybe thicker, more abrasive stuff, so I don't have to ruin my better pair. But I'll put the link to these in there, but I really like these. These are a GB, I think it's Gardner Bender brand, so I've been using these for a long time. They are serrated too, but they've held up really well. And if you don't have a pair of scissors, a good pair of scissors you like to use for like trimming filament or cutting wire, you can also use these flush cutters. So these are kind of nice, but I find that I just like using a pair of scissors better. It's always good to have a nice pair of pliers, especially needle nose. These are probably the ones I use the most. These can be useful for holding wires when you're soldering them, and maybe you just need you don't want to get your fingers too close. They can also be useful for grabbing things, maybe that got in a crack, or getting a nut out of an extrusion or something like that. You know, and these other ones, these are more of the snips that you can cut things with, cut wires with. I don't use these a whole lot. These are useful, I've found, for doing things like getting a grip on maybe a wider object or bolt, or even removing supports on a printer or on a printed object. So they're very useful for that too, just kind of grabbing and removing supports. If you're doing a lot of building, I definitely would recommend getting some kind of a level. So this is a spirit level or a bubble level. It's really useful when you're putting together a printer and you want to make sure that things are nice and level. I use this a lot when I built my Core XY machines. I recommend a nice pair of digital calipers. You're probably going to need to spend around $20 or $30 at least to get a pair that I think is good. The reason you want to do that is because a lot of them, they may have an on-off button, but it always stays on. And I really don't know why they do that. I think it's just cheaper to make it that way. But this one's not a fantastic one. I think I got it at a local big box store like Menards or Lowe's or something. But it really does work well, and I've had this for a couple of years. I haven't had to change the battery yet. If you ever get into CAD design, you're also going to want to have something like this, just so you can measure, you know, how the distances of an object that you're trying to build the part for, or whatever it may be. Another tool I use frequently is just a simple utility blade knife like this. This can be useful for, you know, you get a new package, you slice it open. Maybe there's some rough areas on your print that you want to trim. And a nice set of these smaller screwdrivers come in handy a lot. You might need these for just, of course, smaller screws. A lot of times these are just going to be in Phillips or flathead. But some of the fans that you get on 3D printers have the Phillips. A good set of files is important. You can definitely use these on your 3D prints, but I use them anywhere I might need to, you know, maybe remount a little hole or clearance, or if I need to smooth something down. I've used them on wood, I've used them on plastic. They're pretty basic. They're probably going to break too. Maybe the cheaper ones, or sometimes the handle will come out. But if you're not using them that often, they're fine. So I have a similar set you can see here that I broke off the tip, and I think I was trying to remount a hole, and it might have had, like, you know, maybe I was too rough on it. So over time these are going to wear out pretty quickly, but you can definitely get some more expensive ones. All right, now I'm going to talk about some of my favorite tools, which are electronics tools. And as with all the other tools, there are options in this price range. You know, some of these are kind of good if you're just starting out and you're not sure if you're going to maybe stick with things, so you don't want to spend a lot of money. And other options are, you know, you've been at this for a while and now you want to have some nice tools. So I'm going to cover a little bit of both, and I'll probably talk a little bit about, you know, my preferences. And in some cases I might have bought nicer tools and then realized, maybe the middle of the range one wasn't so bad. All right, these are helping hands, and what you do with this is you might clip a wire or a circuit board to here, and then it'll basically just kind of help you hold the piece that you're working on with the soldering iron. So this is a cheaper set, and this particular one will clamp to like the edge of your table. I do like these though. I really like the flexibility of this pipe here that's used. And you may see this on other types of machinery like CNC machines. Sometimes they'll travel water or gas through here. So it's kind of a cool design. You can also, there's DIY options. At one point I had some DIY ones. This is definitely my favorite helping hands here, the ML Tools yellow. I've also got a Hakko 599B brass wool container here to clean my soldering iron with. This is definitely a lot more rigid. It's also flexible though. It has the nice alligator clips, and these are replaceable, so if you damage them, you can easily replace them. There's some, you know, these two are longer, these two are shorter. So if you're looking for a nice pair of helping hands, these are the ones that I prefer right here. And this is the soldering iron that I use, and I've gone through maybe 3 or 4 different soldering irons, but this is the one I use on my bench. It's the Hakko, and it's the FX888D model. It has a nice holder for the soldering iron. It's also got a really nice design where the tip is going to stay on, it's not going to come loose. And then it's got a section where you can just dip your tip, or if you prefer a sponge, you can use that. Things that I like about the soldering iron, it's really reliable and it has really nice tips. Things I don't like are this little control panel here. You would think pushing up would change your temperature. It actually doesn't. You have to read the manual and go through kind of some weird sequences where you hold buttons in order to change the temperature. So they used to have a knob. Unfortunately, they don't sell them with the knobs anymore. But it is a really good soldering iron. It's just, you're gonna have to get the manual out every time to remember how to change the temp. The soldering iron that I also really like, and I had this before I upgraded to the Hakko. It's actually a clone of the Hakko, and you can even see by kind of the number convention, right? So it's an 898D. The iron itself is very similar, and it also uses the same tips. It's probably not quite as good build quality wise, but what I do like about it is I can very easily change the temperature. It also has a hot air rework station. So this has served me very well. It takes longer to heat up though too, which isn't a big deal. But you know, again, if you want to change the temperature, you just come over here. I think you got to hit enter, and then you can just kind of change it. So 330 is a good general temperature to use. So you can kind of see how that works. Very easy, very straightforward. And then similarly on the hot air rework tool, you're just going to flip the power and then adjust this to the temperature you want it. This can be useful for removing SMD components or you know, just doing rework on a board. Maybe you've got a bad voltage regulator or capacitor that you need to remove or something like that. So when they're tight spaces and not enough to get a soldering iron in, this can be a handy tool. It does take some practice to learn how to use this though. The other downside to these is since these are clones, you never know for sure if you're going to get a good quality one. I bought this one on eBay and I got lucky, but I know some people that'll get them and the temperatures won't be that accurate. So I would probably caution going with something like this, but they are probably $30, $40 cheaper than buying a genuine Hakko. So I would recommend going with the Hakko and just dealing with the temperature issues that I mentioned earlier. A really good option that I like is this TS100 soldering iron. This thing is amazing. As you can see, it's just very small. It's smaller than my hand. It's very portable, and it's still got a digital LED readout, and that's what's going to set the nice irons from the kind of the not so nice irons. You really need something that can accurately control your temperature. If you don't have that, then you're never really going to know what temperature you're soldering at, and I've found that soldering irons without the readout are just not going to get hot enough. The nice thing about this is it's small, it's compact. You can really use any power supply. It's got a DC in here with a wide range of voltage. So in this case, I'm using, I found this old Dell laptop power supply, and then I got an adapter, DC barrel jack adapter for it. Adapter, you can even use a LiPo battery. I've used this one before. It's just really a nice option for portability. The thing about the TS100 is that you can find sales on these, and there are also clones of them, maybe for even as low as $30 or $40. But I would steer clear of the clones and go with you know, a genuine one. What I'm not as excited about is the tip. So with these tips, you actually have to use a tool. You can see here there's a little hex screw, so you have to unscrew that to release the nozzle. So it's not really super easy to change that. It also has kind of a mode where if you're not using it and it doesn't detect use after a while, it'll automatically start cooling down, and you can upgrade the firmware on this, which I've done. Change the temperature, it's pretty easy. You're just going to hold this down and kind of set it to whatever you want. So you hold it down and then you just kind of press it to raise the temperature. So it's a nice design. So once I do that, now it's going to just start heating up to that. A couple of other products. You're going to want to probably get some rosin soldering flux. And what you do with this, it's pretty nasty looking, and it's definitely not something you want to breathe in. You're going to take a little brush or I use a Q-tip, and you're going to apply this to the part that you want to solder. And of course, you can also get rosin core solder, and this is going to have the flux in it, which I really like. I find that, you know, typically in most cases, I don't need to use any of the soldering flux because I can usually get by with this. But some people swear by it and that they like to use the flux on everything. Again, I find for 99% of the time, this rosin core solder is just fine. Also, just buy the solder without the rosin core, like this here. This is fine. You'll notice that this is a 6337 solder, which is just a slightly different mix than the 6040. Either one are fine. Some people will say that they like the 6337 just because it operates in a little bit better temperature range, and either one of these are fine, but again, try to get rosin core. After a while, your soldering tip is going to get oxidized. This one isn't too bad, but you can see there's a little bit of crud on it. So what I'll typically do is I'll heat it up, and then I will just insert it in the brass wool to help clean it. The other thing that you can do, if you're noticing that you're not getting real good thermal conductivity, and maybe your solder's not quite sticking to the tip and wetting around the tip there, you can use what's called a tip tinner. And this is going to allow you to simply dip your tip in, and it'll help recondition that tip and get everything nice and clean. So tip tinner, this is definitely something that I use. I don't use it a whole lot because most of my soldering tips are just fine. But you do want to do that occasionally, and especially if you're noticing issues. Doing electronics, I definitely recommend getting a smoke absorber. This one I found to be pretty good. So when I come in here, you can see that the smoke from the solder is going to go kind of right into the fan area. So it's definitely better going there than in your nostrils. It's got a nice little on and off button. And there's also a carbon pad that you can change out. So, you know, the nice thing about these, you don't really have to spend a lot of money. You can also do a DIY version. But I recommend this one. It works pretty well. These are heat inserts, and these are going to be used for plastic parts when you're building, especially things like Vorons or Hypercubes. You're doing DIY printers or just making functional parts. And these are tips. These are Hakko compatible tips, and they will basically allow you to set those heat inserts into the part, which is how you want to do it. There are other options for inserting these. You can just use like a screw and a lighter and kind of stick them in, but this is definitely a better way to handle that. A pair of electronics tweezers is also a must. These are an iFixit pair. I like these a lot, but a lot of times I'll want to hold a wire down while I'm soldering, and you know, because when you're soldering something, that wire is going to get really hot, so you might not want to use your fingers, right? And it also gives you a little more control over the position of the wiring, especially when you're not using a helping hands. This is one of my favorite tools that I bought recently. I got tired of stripping wire with my fingernails, or kind of using these kind of lame wire strippers, you know, where you're trying to like, okay, which one do I use here? All right, let's stick it in. Nope, that's the wrong one. Okay, maybe it's this one. So, you know, these are fine, but I find that they're just kind of clunky. So I've used this Capri Tools, and the nice thing is it'll work with any size wire. You can manually set the distance. I don't even really use this though. I just kind of eyeball it, and then boom, got my wire strip. So if you're doing a lot of wire stripping, or even just a little, I mean, this is my tool of choice. So this is well worth the money. I would definitely recommend getting one of these if you're doing any kind of wiring. Of course, after you cut your wire and join them, lengthen them, shorten them, whatever it may be, you're going to need some heat shrink. You can also use electrical tape, but that's kind of an old school way of doing it. And this tape tends to get kind of sticky and gummy over time, and it may even come off. So I don't really like using tape anymore unless I have to. So I like this kit a lot. It's a Maxwell kit, and it has a bunch of different lengths. Of course, the most common lengths that I use are the smaller ones, and you know, the more you use of those, the more you run out, and I've run out of a lot of those, so that's okay though. The other kind you can get is like a kit like this, and what you're going to do is you're just going to slide it over, and then you're going to cut it to length so that it covers both joints. And then after that, after you solder it, then you're going to use something like either the barrel of your soldering iron, or I prefer a heat gun if I'm doing a lot of wiring. Here's an example of a heat gun that I'll use for soldering. The nice thing about this is I can just set it here if I want, and then I can hold my piece over it, or of course I can just blow it like you normally might do. It has a couple different settings. It's not too loud. You do got to be careful of this end though. You don't want to touch that after you've been running it for a while. It does get very hot. All right, I hate to admit it, but this is also a tool that I use almost daily, or certainly weekly. But this is a Super Bonder hot glue gun. You can see it's got pretty long glue sticks. The nice thing about this one is that it's portable. It comes off, there's no cord. So you just come in here and you set it in to charge it. And then maybe after 5 minutes or so you'll see that light come on, that means it's on. But after about 5 minutes, it's plenty hot. And then you just, you know, gun it and go. If you're doing wiring, you're not always soldering. You also will need to do a lot of crimping. This is a kit that I use a lot, and it comes with what's called JST XH connectors. Here you can see I've got some different spade terminals and connectors and ring terminals. And this one is a ferrule kit. So you can see that there's all different kinds of sizes of ferrules, and those are going to be used on spring terminals that are commonly found on 3D printer boards. And this is what a spring terminal looks like. So a lot of times manufacturers will just put bare wire in here, or even worse, they will put a soldered wire in. You definitely don't want to do that. So the proper connection for these terminals is a ferrule. You're going to use a crimper like this, and you're going to crimp the wire into the ferrule, and then you're going to place it into the terminal and tighten it down on the top. So what it does is it creates a square connector, and that's the ideal size for this. I think perhaps one of the best tools in my toolkit is this PA09, Engineer PA09 connector pliers. This is a really high quality tool. It is a little expensive, about maybe $50 or so. But the idea here is that you're going to be able to crimp these little pins into these connectors, which are JST-XH. So these are a must-have. I'm going to put a link into the video description on how to actually use these. And you probably, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you've seen me use these. I also have these larger Engineer PA20s. These aren't bad either. The size goes up a little higher, up to a 2.3 millimeter, whereas the 09s go up to a 1.9 millimeter. I found that for just about everything that I need for 3D printing, these 09s are probably just fine. And this Titan crimper is used for things like ring terminals or fork terminals, spade terminals. Wherever you see these three colors, you're going to match up the color, and then you're just going to put that in there along with the wire and give it a good squeeze. And then that's going to crimp your wire to your terminal. And again, I'll put a link in on how I use this so you can see. There are other options. I'll bring out my janky wire strippers again. So these do have spots for the same thing, but you're going to be like really requiring a lot of hand pressure to accurately crimp those, and it's a very thin crimp, so you're only going to get one, so you might have to crimp it twice. Whereas this, it's got a wider mouth, wider area where the terminal is going to fit in. So when you crimp it, you're going to get a double crimp that's going to hold the wire at the front and the wire at the back, so it's a much more secure crimp. And you definitely want your crimps as secure as possible. Otherwise, you might experience like a short, which will then cause electrical problems. Here you can see I've got a couple different options for multimeters, and I'm taking away the two that are kind of cheaper. Really, you want a good multimeter, and the one that I've got here is a auto range one that you're seeing on the left. And this can be used for just about anything, for checking voltage on a circuit, for checking resistance, which I find useful, especially if I'm trying to test like a heater cartridge or a thermistor to make sure it's still working. So definitely a good tool for the toolbox, and something you're going to want for a 3D printing workbench. All right, here are the adhesives that I use on a day-to-day basis. The first one that I really like is this Mercury Adhesives Thin Flex. The nice thing about this is that there's a couple of things really. It's got a no clog tip, so I've never had this thing clogged. Sometimes it'll get a little sticky, but it never clogs, and you've got some good control when you're applying it. The other nice thing is that it accounts for some flex, right? So if you want to glue something and you're going to maybe have a little flex in the design, it's not just going to crack and break. The only downside to this that I can think of is that it does take a little bit longer to set up, but it works really well. And this is pretty common in the RC world, so a lot of people who are into drones or fixed wing type aircraft are going to know about this adhesive. Definitely a good one. And then if you just need something kind of in a bind, you can get these cheap little Duro super glues. I almost consider them 1 or 2 time use because, again, the tips tend to clog up. But if you buy them in small quantities, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it. The other thing about CA glues and glues in general is that they do have a shelf life, so you might want to, unless you're doing a lot of gluing, you might want to get a smaller size of this. This one I've actually had for more than a year, which is probably a little bit too long, but it still works okay. The fresher the better with super glue. Talking about this VHB tape a little bit. This stuff is really good. It's a semi-permanent way to fix things. I used it a lot on the Voron and most recently on another enclosure, but I used it to secure parts that I printed for the electronics hardware to the back of the machine and also the panels. This stuff's really sticky. It is kind of a mess if you stick it to something and have to remove it, so you might have to, you know, kind of clean it off after that because it's pretty strong adhesive. E6000 glue, this is great general purpose glue. It's clear, it's transparent, and it cures pretty quick. You can also paint it if you want. This tube is probably way too big. You can also buy little smaller ones of this, which is what I would recommend, but the worst thing about this is sometimes I have to use pliers to remove the cap if it's been sitting too long. And you can see the cap's starting to wear a little bit. But this is great stuff. I use it for 3D printing, for making earrings and things like wood to metal, plastic to plastic. It's just a really good general purpose glue. Adhesive that I would really recommend is this 3D Gloop. And this particular one is for PLA. Now you can certainly use super glue or CA glue, but this stuff really gives you a good sturdy bond. And sometimes you just need to use electrical tape. So I'll use this on maybe thicker wires, or you know, I might use it temporarily to hold things. I just have a roll of black and white. At this point, I'd like to talk about my experience with some of the 3D printing accessories that I have, and really just go through the ones that I think are probably the most useful. I've been 3D printing now for around 6 years or so as of the creation of this video, so I've had a good opportunity to experience these things and maybe try a few different things out. The first thing that any good 3D printer workbench is going to have are plenty of spare parts. So the parts that I tend to go through the most, I've just kind of laid out here. Of course, you know, you want to get a good DC fan, and you're going to want to make sure your voltage is right. So I actually really like these Sunon Maglev fans. They're very low noise, and they also last a very long time. This particular one is 12 volt. I don't really use 12 volt on my printers anymore, so I've repurposed this for something else. Something that I probably go through the most are thermistors and heater cartridges, and you can see here, this is a E3D genuine one. There's also varying types of thermistors. This is a genuine E3D thermistor. So a lot of people have E3D thermistor types. These also work in kind of generic clones, but you're just going to be able to come in, put a little bolt in and tighten it. You know, unfortunately, these tend to go out, especially if there's not good wire strain relief. So sometimes the wires will kink or short. And something else that's very critical is going to be these DC brushless fan motors. So these are the 5015 style, and I use these a lot for part cooling. And unfortunately, things happen. I know more often than not, something like a bearing will go out and it'll start making noise, or maybe I'll accidentally hit the blower. So there are things that can damage them. Sometimes it's user error, but oftentimes it's just low quality parts. These I've found to be pretty good. I've really found that these Triangle Labs thermistors are really good. Anything Triangle Labs brand I've had good luck with if you're looking to save a little money but still have some decent quality parts. Same thing goes with the heater cartridges. So they make heater cartridges as well as thermistors, and a whole lot of other stuff too. Also a good idea to have some spare heat sinks, and especially if you're still using the E3D type, and then also the heat breaks. This is an E3D compatible heat break. There are a lot of different styles of this. This particular one here is called a 4.1. So the PFTE tube will go all the way down in, almost to here, where it connects with the nozzle. That's not a great kind, but a lot of the Creality style machines use it. Make sure you get a high quality heat break. I would recommend the genuine E3D when possible. Triangle Labs also has a pretty good one. But if you get a poor quality heat break, you can get problems with filament getting caught inside the heat break, and then jams or low quality prints. I think having a spare heat block is a must. Sometimes you'll get this gunk that stays on there, and it just makes it, you know, it's kind of ugly. Maybe the heat break, maybe it's fine, but if you want to keep things nice and clean, it's a good idea to have spares. So sometimes, you know, because things get too gunked up, you might not be able to remove these screws. So if that's the case, then it's helpful to have a spare on hand. And then of course there's the socks. So the socks will help you keep your block nice and warm. So what'll happen is I've had situations where my part cooling fan will blow on the heat block and then cause it to lose temperature, so it makes it harder to keep the nozzle hot. So the socks really help with that. It also helps keep the filament that might you know, otherwise get on the block. So it helps keep it nice and clean. And then last but certainly not least, you're going to want some spare nozzles. There are so many different kinds. I like these Micro Swiss ones. I don't even know what this one is, but probably my favorite kind are the Slice Engineering Vanadium ones, or Bridgemasters, and I've got links down there. I also like the E3D Nozzle X, and E3D just came out with one called the Obsidian, which I guess is even better than the Nozzle X. And here are some of the standard tools I use for swapping out nozzles on E3D systems. So unfortunately with E3D V6 you do need to hold the heat block, and then while you're doing that you can unscrew the nozzle while it's heated up. So it's going to require both hands. Luckily the new Revo stuff that's coming out is all one-handed, and you don't even have to heat tighten it. So, but if you're still using E3D stuff, then you want to get something like this. So the nice thing here is this Z-Catch kit. You can kind of come in, put it on the nozzle, hold your wrench, and just kind of turn it that way. The only thing I don't really like about this set as much is it's kind of hard to get these pieces off. And I use a set of pallet tools like this to get my prints off the bed.
99% of the time I'm using this number 2 one. The nice thing is these are not sharp on the edges, so you're not gonna, I mean, you probably could cut yourself, but it's gonna be tough. Whereas like if you're using something like this, that's maybe a more traditional scraper, these have some sharp edges. You can really cut yourself, and I've seen people need stitches because they were kind of like maybe cleaning a print off or taking a print off the bed and it slipped and caught up and nailed them. So I wouldn't recommend this style, but unfortunately a lot of printers do come with these. So get yourself just some of these little palette knives. These are great. And if you want to take up painting, you can do it too. For everyday maintenance, I use either the synthetic oil or the synthetic grease. I use these a lot on the rods or rails, depending on the printer. And I use this primarily on things like bearings or sometimes rails as well. So the nice thing about the oil is that it's very low viscosity, so it'll allow you to move pretty quickly. The lube is good too, and it's good for lead screws and other things that maybe you're not moving as quickly on typically. And it also helps keep a protective layer on it. You don't want to use a ton of it, but periodically I'll just go in and I will kind of grease up things. And I've got a link to show how I do that in one of my tips and tricks videos with the Voron Zero. If you're into a lot of building, you're definitely going to want to get some Permatex or Loctite thread locker. This is great if you're primarily working with metal on metal, so you know, a screw going into a metal and no plastic parts nearby. The problem is that this does have a little bit of acetone in it, so if you mix it with plastic, it just doesn't do great. The Permatex is really technically not designed for plastic either, but I've found that I can, you know, with this gel, I can put my screw here and then I can carefully insert it through my plastic part and then I can kind of screw it in. So typically there's less mess and less cleanup, and that's going to get less on the part. And this is, at least in my experience, I've not ever had an issue with ABS. I know there's also an orange, and I've heard that the orange will work both with ABS and PETG. And you're going to want to use Permatex or Loctite in situations where you have a lot of vibration and screws that may come loose. So this will help them stay in place. Where I tend to use them are on the gantry, anything on the gantry, and also anything on the filament drive. So usually the little Bondtech gears that are you know, screwed into the motor shaft on a direct drive or Bowden setup, that's a great place to use one. I have magnetic beds on just about every printer that I have. This is a really nice upgrade. So you can see it's kind of floppy and flexy. That makes it really easy to just pull off and bend so your parts come off easily. And here's underneath what it looks like. So this is a high temp magnetic sheet. There are different styles of this, but this particular model came from TH3D, and I think their stuff is really good. From time to time, I will lose adhesion on my PEI sheet, which is the surface that I prefer to use. So then what I'll use is 1500 grit, which is very fine grit sandpaper. And then I'll just kind of go over it real gently, the entire plate. I'll clean it off first, but then I'll go over it, and then I'll clean it off with soap. And you can see this, I've got a tips and tricks video where I show the process, but that'll restore the adhesion. You'll notice that I also have kind of a little bit of glue stick on here, so I use this PVA, this purple glue stick. This is not actually for adhesion, this is to reduce adhesion, because if you're printing PETG or TPU, you can actually damage your PEI surface. So I always like to, just to be careful, I'll put a little bit of this so I don't have to worry about damaging my PEI sheet. When you do damage your PEI sheet and you need to remove it, I find this Goo Gone to be very useful. So when you start peeling this up on the corner and kind of work your way over, it's going to leave behind a bunch of glue and gunk. So that's not fun to clean off, but it's better than throwing out your sheet, and you can buy replacement sheets pretty easily. From time to time, even though I have auto bed leveling on my printers, I like to also double check that everything is mechanically as level as possible. And to do that, I use a dial indicator, and you can see right here, this is a dial indicator with a mount that I designed for this rail. So every printer is going to be a little bit different. In my case, you know, I use this one. I can slide it, or it's a little bit more accurate when you slide the rail directly. So I usually will slide it from front to back just to check level, and then I will go ahead and manually adjust the screws. And again, that's just something, having a flat bed is a necessity in 3D printing, even if you do have an auto bed leveling tool like the BL Touch here. And at times your nozzle is going to get gunked up with filament on the end of it. So what I will do a lot of times is I'll slide this under and I'll just kind of give it a good scrub. And I typically will do that with it heated up, so that way the plastic comes off a little easier. But this is just a simple brass wire brush, and it works pretty well.
Wow, that was a lot to cover, wasn't it? There certainly are a lot of tools and accessories that I've accumulated probably over the last 5 or 6 years or so of being in the 3D printing hobby. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and if you do have any questions, if there's maybe something that I missed, a tool that maybe you think would be something that we should add to the video or I should have covered, please go ahead and jump in and comment. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. My intention is for those who are starting out in the hobby or looking for ideas on what do they need to add to their workbench. I think this is also applicable to folks who maybe they've been 3D printing for a while and they're just looking to possibly make some upgrades or get some advice or insight into what I've found working. Certainly there are other folks out there who have been doing this longer than I have, and maybe they've got some other ideas or strong opinions on other tools that work. So I'd like to hear from all of you, and as always, if you find this content helpful, please like and subscribe, and I definitely appreciate it if you use my affiliate links. It costs you nothing extra and it helps me out if there is a tool that you found that you like. So thanks again for watching, and happy printing.